and actually took some vacation time this morning and afternoon to come up and speak against this bill. As soon as I'm done here, I will go back and continue to process absentee ballot applications. So I have a direct interest in how we serve our clients, who are our municipal voters in this. I wanted to briefly, respectfully differ with the author's interpretation. Glad that Ledge Council pointed out that the bill as written specifically prohibits my office from returning a ballot that's, say, missing the witness's signature. I would beg you to take that provision out. It is our goal as municipal clerks and their deputies and employees to provide excellent customer service to our voters. And we really, if there's time, we want to still be able to provide that service because we don't want people to think that they voted. We want them to actually have the opportunity to exercise their right to vote. So I would beg you, at the very least, change that and fix that problem. I would feel awful. And especially in conjunction with the notion that then that person, the way the law the bill is written now, that person would then, on being notified that their absentee ballot was invalid, would be prohibited from going on election day and voting. So their ballot would not be counted, and if they attempted to correct that by voting in person, let's say, and we have had before, when it's too late to get a ballot back, we have had cases where people pick up their elderly father or mother, from assisted living, and they're on the permanent absentee list, and drive them to the curbside in front of the polling place, and so that because you're aware that to assist the disabled, we're allowed to have 2 election officials bring a ballot to the curb for voting, so that they can't get out of their car. So we actually have people taking these heroic measures to fix their elderly parents' right to vote, and that would actually become a crime under this bill. And so I did want to make sure that to beg for that. Please don't make me provide bad service to my voters. As far as I did want to clarify the understanding of how we do it now, because this is really infrequent and it's not really a problem or a burden on either the clerk or the poll workers. The author kept mentioning, and maybe the statutes don't paint an accurate picture of sort of what really happens on election day, of having to go find the envelope. There's one unified record of who's voted and who's not, and that's the poll book. When voter number 1 comes in, we get voter slip number 1, we find their name, put number 1 there. If they're in person, they sign the poll book now, move on. If voter number 1's absentee ballot comes later in the day, when each absentee envelope comes through, it's read out loud, and we find the person in the poll book. So it's not like we have to go check to make sure there isn't an absentee there. It's if the person walks in and there's already a number next to their name, then they voted and they're done. If the absentee comes in and there's already a number next to the name, then we leave it unopened, reject it, make a note of the chief inspector's statement that it's rejected because the voter's already voted in person. It's not difficult, and it's the due diligence it's just our normal operating procedure. And we'll continue to do all of those steps, whether this is the law or not, because that's in fact how we would catch it if someone did break that law. This is how we would find out that they had through that exact same procedure. So it's not a burden, it's not difficult for us, and we're happy to do it. Another thing I wanted to sort of specify by statute is that we have absentee voting in Wisconsin. We do not have early voting. And some people use the terms interchangeably, but there is a distinction. When you seal your absentee ballot in the envelope and return it, you have not voted until on election day. You are checked into the poll book, the envelope is opened, and the ballot is fed into either the box for hand counting or the tabulator for tabulation. An example of the difference would say Texas, which is an early voting state. They consider that you have voted when the envelope is returned to the appropriate office.
If you fill out an absentee ballot and put it in the mail in Texas, and you die before Election Day, your vote still counts because you have already voted. If you do the same in Wisconsin, we will reject your ballot at the polls. Because I actually looked at the obituaries. I have actually before clipped a note to the relevant page in the poll book, noting that when so-and-so's ballot shows up, we need to reject it because that person had passed on last week, and therefore is no longer an eligible voter. So you have not to say that someone's voting twice or double voting. They actually haven't voted at all until we process at the polls on Election Day the ballot. There was a well-publicized, so it's not a big deal for us. We do it all the time. It's been this case for decades. The current rules about returning ballots or providing all of this it's permissive. There is no mandate that we have to do it, but the law, as currently written, allows us to provide it if, in our judgment, this is a service that we can provide in a timely manner. So we don't want that discretion taken away from clerks to be able to, again, provide excellent service to our constituents. I can think of a couple cases where someone has come into our office, voted absentee, and then come back for one way or another that seems to me to be perfectly legitimate. One of them, I recall, was somebody had voted in our office and came back the next day perplexed because she said, well, I got home and my husband asked me what I thought of that referendum, and she hadn't flipped the ballot over to see it. So she came back all in a worry that she had missed the last part. That's her fault. But it was not difficult for us to rectify that. We issued her a new ballot, made a notation that was the envelope, because we sort them to put them into their proper polling places. We made a note that this is the good one, reject the other one, per the voter's instructions. We simply documented it, sent it along, no problem. Probably took an extra minute on my part to make that happen successfully. So didn't bother me. I remember another case where one of our poll workers who had sent in her absentee ballot well in advance because she works all day at a different ward than her own. Something happened, this was an April election, the day before the candidate of her choice had gone on the radio and said something that appalled her. And she was aghast and took a break from her polling place, ran over to the adjacent polling place first thing in the morning so that she could cast a ballot in person for the other candidate because she was so, she had no way of knowing until the day that this was going to happen. And these are very rare. I'm thinking of two in like the past 5 years where this has come up and been an issue for us. And by the way, I work for the city of Madison. We have more than a handful of absentee voters on a regular basis. So it's rare. It's not a problem. The circumstances I can think of are perfectly understandable. The one thing we did have, reports a couple years ago from Milwaukee, where we had people showing up on election day who were mistakenly allowed to cast a ballot after they had mailed in an absentee ballot, and due to error, they both got counted. One, you correctly identified that this was an error on the part of the poll workers, not of the voters, and that's correct under current law. But if we want to clear that up, I would go and repeal 7.52 that allows what I think is the horrifically unaccountable practice of the central count of absentee ballots. The right way to do it, and the way that it's done in almost every municipality in the state, with about 4 or 5 exceptions, is that they're done at the polls on election day. And there's a whole lengthy bit of statutory instructions and GAB instructions for how to, with accountability, do a central tally. And it's just really complicated, and as we have evidence that in fact it just doesn't work properly. And in fact, doing that, you remove the secrecy from the ballot because you have to put a serial number on each absentee ballot, so that if that happens, you can go back and dig through the ballot bags and find the serial number and manually deduct the total. It's just not a good practice. And I think there's a legitimate concern when we hear newspaper stories like that, because that's not the way it's supposed to work. But I don't think that this bill before this body is the appropriate way to correct that problem. And I think if the concern is on that aspect of the integrity, then it would be wiser to look at removing what I would call the failed experiment of central count of absentees in 7.52. Thanks for letting me talk for a while. Can I answer any questions?
Yeah, any questions you can make personal language?
So I'm not familiar with central count. We usually do it with the ballot. So
Yes.
you take the envelope, you put that in the absentee envelope.
Yes.
So you read the name, you mark it off, and then for the central count, you assign a serial number to the ballot and the envelope.
Yeah.
So then you can go back. So if someone does vote again,
Yeah.
you eliminate that one.
Yeah. So it's done like, say, all at the clerk's office or at City Hall or Village Hall or something instead of at the polling place. So they'll do all of them for the individual. I don't think the idea is that it saves time, but in my experience, I don't see how it possibly could save time. We're really good at this, getting the process through. I regularly scoff when I see the election returns from other states. We won't know till Wednesday or whatever because they still have 8,000 absentee ballots to process. I'm like, really? I think I did that tonight. I did appreciate earlier your question that you correctly identified sort of the order of events, what happens to an absentee ballot.
And then just really quickly, how many polling locations do you have?
The city of Madison has 88. Well, we are about to. We had 80 redistricting, we increased it. So really, it's easier to divide that up at the individual polling places than to try to do that whole amount at one location.
And how many times have you seen or heard of this happening where someone comes in and asks to
Essentially re-vote?
Yeah.
There are two instances that I mentioned that I could think of off the top of my head, and I would guess that some less memorable occasion has happened another handful of times. And I'm thinking over the last 5 years that I've been working on this.
So as a clerk, if this bill were to go through and an absentee was sent, he was still there, and then another person came in with the appropriate ID, and that person and that ID matched that absentee, and he said he didn't cast a ballot, what would you do?
Well, and we don't have anything to address that now, just so you know, but whatever gets there first is what's counted.
Okay, so regardless of that person said.
That's correct. And that's, that's the current statute. Please jump in if I'm not. So for instance, if an absentee ballot, but of course, the idea is going in with, by the way, I have no problem with the changing the fax and email to just standardize at what point you check the ID. I kind of thought it was silly before, so that's great that we just have one rule. So we've got that, but there's no additional, and here's the thing, under this bill, if that person came in and the ballot, and there had been a notation that the ballot had been mailed and returned, there was that watermark in the poll book, and the ballot hadn't arrived and been counted yet, we would still have to refuse that voter's right to vote.
So
I've never
do a professional.
Not as far as I can tell from and I read the bill. It doesn't. This would not be one of the reasons to allow. It would be inappropriate for us to issue a provisional ballot except for the specific reasons outlined in the statute. This doesn't add to it. But I would add before suggesting that would be something to tweak. I'm not sure how we would resolve that. If you've got a yellow envelope and a blue envelope and signed statements attesting that each is accurate, I don't know on what basis we would discriminate between them. So and that would be a lot more paperwork. So I wouldn't want that. It more than happy to do it for paperwork if it helps, but only when it helps.
Any other questions? Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Right. Back to the salt lands. Thank you.
Back to work.
Next up, we have Brenda Jazuski, speaking in favor, representing the Wisconsin Public Works Association, followed by Andrea Kaminsky, speaking against from Legal and Borders, followed by Artis Tierney, speaking on behalf of
Yeah, and I completely lost your